With over 20,000 U.S. troops potentially leaving the continent, European leaders brace for a systemic shift in transatlantic security. As Washington recalibrates its military commitment, is this a necessary realignment or a reckless move that leaves NATO exposed? Or could this be a dangerous move that could strengthen Putin? This and many more will be explored in today's Flash News. Good afternoon and welcome. I am Thabita Ako. Let's begin. Today, as President Donald Trump reshapes America's global military posture, European leaders are bracing for a potential withdrawal of 20,000 U.S. troops from the continent. The move, widely expected in diplomatic circles, has triggered a fierce debate. One side of the debate argues that reducing America's troop presence in Europe is long overdue. They view Trump's decision as a strategic realignment that forces European nations to take more responsibility for their own defense. For decades, U.S. presidents have warned that NATO allies must increase their military spending rather than relying on American taxpayers. This administration has simply accelerated that demand, with some arguing that the move will ultimately strengthen Europe's self-sufficiency. A former NATO official, Kamal Grant, acknowledged that Europe's defense capabilities remain a work in progress, but supported the idea of transitioning away from dependence on the U.S. The Europeans have a serious problem of readiness that they are trying to fix, but it takes time, he said. Supporters of Trump's plan also cite the need for a shift in focus. With growing threats from China in the Indo-Pacific, they argue that maintaining such a large U.S. military presence in Europe is outdated. They point to decades of troop reductions since the Cold War. When the U.S. forces in Europe numbered close to 500,000, that figure dropped to 350,000 in the 90s and has since fluctuated between 75,000 and 105,000. The withdrawal, as it stands right now, of 20,000 troops, they argue, is merely a continuation of this long-term trend. However, others see this as a reckless decision that could have their consequences. Critics warn that pulling U.S. troops from Europe now, at a critical time when Russia's war in Ukraine is still ongoing, would send the wrong message to Moscow. They argue that Trump's approach not only weakens NATO, but also plays into Vladimir Putin's hands. One NATO diplomat expressed deep concern, warning that such a withdrawal could leave holes in European security that countries are not yet able to fill. The fear is that a weakened NATO presence could embolden Russia to push further into Eastern Europe, threatening not only Ukraine but also other vulnerable nations like the Baltic states. Trump's stance on NATO has long been a source of tension. His administration has sent mixed signals, at times demanding that European nations do more, while at other times questioning the alliance's very existence. Critics still argue that Trump's personal disdain for NATO and his praise for Putin suggests that his withdrawal strategy is driven more by ideology than by a coherent defense policy. Well, recent events have done little to ease those fears. At the Munich Security Conference, Vice President J.D. Vance openly criticized European leaders, accusing them of failing to uphold shared values, such as freedom of speech. This has only reinforced suspicions that the administration is looking for an excuse to justify reducing America's military footprint. Think so? Well, on the other hand, some argue that Trump's unpredictability is part of a broader negotiation tactic one could design to pressure Europe into stepping up. The administration has assured NATO allies that there are no imminent plans for a major withdrawal, but critics remain skeptical, pointing to Trump's past actions where he has made sudden unilateral military decisions. The debate over Trump's troop withdrawal plan ultimately boils down to two competing worldviews. While it seems as a pragmatic shift in U.S. strategy, one that will push European nations to invest more in their own security while allowing America to focus on emerging threats in Asia. It is also perceived as a reckless move, a gamble that could weaken NATO at a critical moment and leaves Europe vulnerable to Russian aggression. Possibly. As transatlantic relations hang in the balance, the central question remains: is this the beginning of a more independent Europe, or will Trump's retreat from the continent create a power vacuum that Moscow is eager to exploit? Well, we'll get to know as the days unfold. Today, bringing you updates on Gaza ceasefire deal. We've been actually bringing you current updates, but here is one. President Donald Trump prepares to host freed Israeli hostage Eli Sharabi at the White House. Eli Sharabi's harrowing captivity has become a rallying point for Israel. He was abducted from his home during Hamas' October 7th attack. He endured a 16-month of starvation, torture, and psychological abuse before being fed alongside other hostages. His interview account of captivity, which Trump reportedly watched with shock and great sympathy, has intensified calls for within Israel for the government to prioritize the release of the remaining captives. The move is being interpreted in a starkly different ways. Some view it as a humanitarian gesture, showcasing Trump's continued commitment to Israel amid ongoing hostage negotiations. Others see it as a calculated political move designed to reinforce his administration's hardline support for Israel, while undermining calls for a broader ceasefire deal. Well, will this meeting help push forward diplomatic effort, or will it deepen the divisions surrounding the war in Gaza? However, Trump's invitation to Sharabi comes at a pivotal moment. The Israeli government is locked in a fragile ceasefire negotiations with Hamas, we all know that, with both sides accusing the other of violating agreement. By meeting with Sharabi, we see that Trump sends a clear signal that his administration is standing firmly with Israel at a time when some international allies are urging restraint. Trump's embrace of Israel's hardline stance has been a cornerstone of his foreign policy, reinforced by his approval of a nearly $3 billion arms sale last week. His administration bypassed congressional review to supply Israel with 2,000-pound bombs, weapons that have been instrumental in Israel's military operations in Gaza. Critics argue that this unconditional support has emboldened Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who recently announced a blockade on humanitarian aid to Gaza, a move the Trump administration has publicly, vocally, and outrightly backed. Let's take a look.
Israel has accepted President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff's plan to extend the temporary ceasefire by 50 days. During that time, we can discuss the conditions for a permanent ceasefire that will end the war in Gaza. In Witkoff's plan, half of the hostages would be released right away, and the remaining half would be released if we reach an agreement on a permanent ceasefire. Again, Israel has accepted this plan, I accepted this plan, but so far, Hamas has rejected it. Hamas had also put forward positions for a permanent ceasefire that are totally unacceptable. Israel has decided to stop letting goods and supplies into Gaza, something we've done for the past 42 days. We've done that because Hamas steals the supplies and prevents the people of Gaza from getting them. It uses these supplies to finance its terror machine, which is aimed directly at Israel and our civilians, and this we cannot accept.
Netanyahu's day. His decision to halt all aid to Gaza has drawn sharp international condemnation, with critics accusing Israel of using food and medical supplies as leverage to pressure Hamas into accepting a ceasefire deal. Hamas, in turn, has labeled the blockade an act of genocide, an effort to derail ongoing negotiation. Could that be true? Well, a White House official confirmed that Israel coordinated the aid suspension with Trump administration, further solidifying U.S. support for Israel. This deepens the divide between those who argue that Trump's unwavering backing of Israel is necessary to secure the release of hostages and those who believe it is worsening the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The current ceasefire agreement, which saw the release of some Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, expired on Saturday. Meanwhile, talks over a second phase where Hamas would release more hostages in return for an Israeli military pullout and a permanent ceasefire have stalled. While Israeli officials have signaled willingness to extend the truce through April 20th, Hamas has rejected Israel's latest proposal, demanding stronger guarantees for Palestinian civilians. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has made it clear that no ceasefire will move forward unless Hamas releases the remaining captives. Trump's invitation to Sharabi moving over to this could add pressure on Hamas, reinforcing Israel's argument that its military operations will continue unless hostages are freed. However, it also risks inflaming tensions, making Hamas less likely to agree to further concessions. Trump's decision to host Sharabi carries political weight beyond the immediate crisis. It allows him to highlight his administration's strong ties with Israel, a key issue among his political base. It also diverts attention from growing criticism over his handling of the broader Middle East crisis, where U.S. allies have become increasingly uneasy about the scale of destruction in Gaza. Some analysts argue that this meeting is less about diplomacy and more about reinforcing Trump's credentials. By publicly embracing Sharabi's story, Trump can further frame the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a struggle between good and evil, leaving little room for nuisance in negotiations. With the hostage situation unresolved, the war in Gaza is intensifying and ceasefire talks in limbo. Trump's meeting with Sharabi adds another layer of complexity. Most probably, supporters see it as a necessary reminder of why Israel must continue its fight, while critics warn it risks further entrenching positions on both sides. President Trump is such a great diplomat, we all know that, and Trump's intervention to push negotiations forward may mark a lasting peace for both nations. Well, we still hope that this gets to an end. Moving over to the islands in another report, Taiwan's military is facing a recruitment crisis at a time when the threat for China is more pronounced than ever. With 12,000 troops leaving service between 2022 and 2024 and enlistment numbers failing to keep pace, the self-ruled island is grappling with a fundamental question. Can it maintain a strong enough defense on its own, or is it relying too heavily on the prospect of U.S. intervention? China's aggressive posturing around Taiwan has escalated in recent years. With the current reports, we all know that with more frequent airspace incursions and military drills simultaneously invading this nation, yet Taiwan's military faces major hurdles in keeping its forces combat ready. A decline in birth rate, private sector competition, and lingering distrust over past pension cuts have discouraged many from joining or staying in service. Moving forward, Dr. Chang Ting, a senior research fellow with the ROC Society for Strategic Studies and a former Navy officer, argues that most Taiwanese aren't willing to make the sacrifices required for victory in war. This is why some have revived an old idea enlisting migrant workers to serve in non-combat roles in exchange for residency or citizenship. But does this approach solve the problem? Or does it highlight Taiwan's deeper struggle with military readiness? Well, Taiwan's military decline may not be as dire as it seems. American geopolitical analyst Christopher Clifford believes Taiwan's strategy must evolve. Cyber attacks and misinformation are bigger threats than a PRC version of Normandy, he said, challenging the common assumption that China would attempt a full-scale amphibious invasion. Clifford points out that many modern militaries, including China, are struggling with recruitment, and that Taiwan has made long overdue reforms, such as relaxing outdated height restrictions and allowing tattoos. But does Taiwan's pivot toward tech-driven defense capabilities mean it can afford to downsize its traditional armed forces? One of the biggest uncertainties Taiwan faces is the role of the United States. We know that Washington has long maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan, deliberately refusing to clarify whether it could intervene in the event of a Chinese attack. While this approach aims to deter both Chinese aggression and unilateral Taiwanese independence moves, some fear it leaves Taiwan in a dangerous position. Meanwhile, at the same time, Taiwan is waiting on $22 billion in U.S. arms deliveries. While President William Lai has vowed to boost defense spending, some experts worry that even with advanced weaponry, Taiwan may lack enough trained personnel to effectively use them. If the island does not fix its recruitment issue soon, could it find itself unmatched despite having superior technology? With military enlistment continuing to decline, some have floated the idea of recruiting Taiwan's 800,000 migrant workers primarily from Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines to fill logistical and support roles. The concept has been debated informally for decades but has never been seriously considered at the government level. Clifford suggests that a foreign legion could work if structured properly, with roles in infrastructure, disaster relief, and defensive operations rather than frontline combat. They could assist with construction projects in peacetime and set up defense in wartime. No refuel required, he explained. Yet it's been observed that relying on foreign recruitment would highlight Taiwan's unwillingness to defend itself and could even undermine morale among local troops. Would such a program strengthen Taiwan's military resilience, or would it reveal deeper weakness that China could exploit? As Taiwan faces one of its most critical security challenges in decades, the debate over how to bolster its military continues. While cyber war and technological advancement may reduce the need for shared troop numbers, the reality remains that China is growing more assertive by the day. Will Taiwan take both steps to reinvigorate its military, or will it continue to rely on outdated policies and hope that the U.S. will step in when needed? And if war does come, will Taiwan be truly prepared to fight? Or will its shrinkingly military prove to be its Achilles heel? Well, because in recent times, superpower seems to be gearing up for the unknown. Think about that. Well, coming to the climax of this report, Taiwan's military is at a crossroads. With troop numbers dwindling and recruitment failing, Taiwan faces an urgent question. Can it deter Beijing's growing aggression without relying on U.S. intervention? The island's defense strategy is falling apart at a critical time. Well, until next time, this is where we'll be drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Remember, tonight we'll be bringing you untold stories at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Until then, do have a pleasant day.